It's my great pleasure to welcome at IIASA two European and world-leading experts, both scientifically and politically, in the area of agriculture, futures, food, everything related to that. It's my double pleasure because they are not only world-leading experts, but they are also collaborators of IIASA and friends of IIASA, and my personal friends. That makes it very special to have them here. Veerman, Professor Veerman, has been Minister of Agriculture, Nature and Fisheries, that's how we call it in the Netherlands. Everything on
food quality.
Food quality, even that, yeah. Sort of three things. And he has been a minister, and he has been also chairman of the Wageningen group, I call it, for a long time. In the time where Wageningen was reforming itself to a very different entity. Namely, an entity where the university started to collaborate very heavily with the institutions. Veerman was also leading one of the most known attempts to put together a vision about the future of a country, in this case a vision in terms of protection against floods and scenarios about development of the Netherlands, so-called Delta Committee, where I was one of the privileged members together with him. You know about this story, it was a big success story. It was adopted by Dutch cabinet, Dutch government. And Veerman is also on the boards of many very important institutions, including Rabobank, Netherlands. Last but not least, he is on the board of Dutch Science Foundation. And Dutch Science Foundation is our NMO from Netherlands. So I think it's a quite good thing we have Kees here with us this afternoon. Welcome once more, Kees.
Thank you.
Franz Fischler. He needs less introduction because he has been here very often already. But let me do some. Franz was European Commissioner. Some people say the most successful and most charming one. I don't know, that's what people say.
Oh.
For how many years?
Always charming.
For 12 years, Franz? Or for how many years have you been there in Brussels?
10 years.
10 years. 2 terms. 2 terms. And he has been there also in a very critical time for European agriculture policies. Times when the common agriculture policies were developed and discussed. And during those times, Kees and Franz interacted with each other, worked with each other. So if you really want to ask the questions about how the common policies, agriculture, European context came about, you have a chance this afternoon. And also to ask a little bit more about how they are operating. Franz is, of course, President of Alpbach Forum. Alpbach Forum is our very valued partner of IIASA. As you know, we have put together, Franz and I, this high-level Alpbach-Luxembourg group. We have started to collaborate 2 years ago very successfully. So Franz, welcome again at IIASA. It's our great pleasure. And thanks for all support which you have been giving us last 2 years. Florian Kraxner, I don't need to introduce to you, but maybe to Kees and Franz. Florian is Deputy Director of the program which is dealing with agriculture, food, land, and everything connected to that. It's a large program. Walking here, it's about 70 people all together working on the issues. And he had the courage to stand up today and to challenge you with his response to your challenge in terms of science. Is science ready to do all of that which is needed to be done for the next years and decennia? Let me start, and let me start with what we will do. We will have a first brief pitches by our lead guests, and then we will come back to a discussion, and this question will be then fired by me, and they will be responding, and of course we will open up for discussion with you, all of you here. We have about 1 hour, and we would not to extend it too much. So let me start with Kees. And Kees, can you give us, in your perception, your experience, your vision, a pitch on what do you see as the major challenges and major opportunities in securing enough and safe food for 9 billion by 2050?
Well, thank you, Pavel, and it's great to be here. It's really an honor, and especially with my friend Franz Fischler, with whom I had very lively debates, and he always helped me. So, to start with this question, I would like to make some overarching comments on this specific question you propose to commend me to, and these are of somewhat of a philosophical nature. Every year in this week of February, I have an inclination to philosophy. I don't know whether that stems from, but it's serious. I wonder whether we are still in the age of rationality. I have serious doubt about the fact that irrationality is coming up, and I don't know where it is from, but in many countries it translates itself into serious doubts about the role of science and technology. And the best way to see that is the discussion about genetically modified organisms. This is a debate between people of different worlds. And there my first point is, do we engage into an area of irrationality instead of rationality? That is the first more philosophical question. If we say there's a serious threat, and I think it is, then we have a totally different opinion about what to do concerning the question you posed here. And the second one is, and I read it also an article of Friedman in the New York Times. We have democracy on its way back in a world, on a world scale. Democracy is retreating in many countries. And in the fastest growing countries, we have not governments that are democratic in a way we use the word in the Western world, or in a way we are speaking of democracy as we in the Western world have given different forms of it, but in essence it's the votes of the people that are definite for decisions made by the government. So these two remarks before, are we saying goodbye to rationality and therefore technology, and what is the meaning of the dwindling down of democracy in case of decision making in these very serious questions about feeding the world, protecting the climate, etc., etc. And if we come to the more specific question of how can we feed the world, I'm optimistic that we can feed the world. But exactly that is my point. We need science and technology more than ever to solve these kind of problems. We need science and technology to cope with the problem of climate change. But that's exactly what is the problem. If you look at China, for instance, or you look at the other fast-growing economies, exactly there the problem is it's not a democratic decision-making system, and technology is not everywhere the sole and only solution to the problem. And even in the Western world, we are doubting whether technology is helping us in the end or not. And behind that, of course, the role of science. So I'm optimistic what can be done, but I'm pessimistic if you view to these two philosophical trends, so to speak. So if we hold on to be Democrats and to bring democracy in the world like the United States fundamentally wants to do, many times by force, and it's not very successful, as we can all say. We can all make that statement. But if we leave science as our, let's say, machinery of solving our problems, then we are back to the Middle Ages, I fear. And well, this is my biggest concern about this question.
Thank you, Kees. I think there is an interesting implication of what you say for both the IIASA discussion, but also for some global discussions. Let me start with the latest one. I think you all are familiar with discussion points which are now popping up in the newspaper, but also in the academic debate about the current geopolitical conflicts, for example, in Syria. And there is a stream of scientists and politicians who actually believe that it goes all back to issues which Kees put up. It's nothing to do with religion, it's to do with the food and water and lack of democracy in providing those resources. I think it's a very interesting position. On the other side, you say about irrationality and emotion and cognitive part versus technology, which probably is issue, and the governance, which is the democracy. I think this is something where we are looking here into the future as well. Because many of our models, and this is my challenge to Florian, are based on the, we call it parameterized space of the past. We know scenarios, we have numbers, but we don't have any irrationality, any transition to the cognition type of part of it, any transition to this new governance. So I'm taking your challenge for the later debate. This probably is something which the science, but also the discussion about science policy should consider. Thank you very much. Franz, what is your take on that?
Dear Pavel, dear Cees, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this 1-hour discussion as it is planned. Let me start by a short reaction to the question raised by Cees in the very beginning about the more philosophical question related to our skepticism against science, which is spreading all over Europe. And this is one of the phenomena. It is very much concentrated to Europe. We are the most pessimistic as far as rational arguments are concerned. And here you are almost in the center, because here is a place where you have a lot of rational thinking, but we are surrounded in Austria by people who are the most pessimistic, I would say, when it comes to issues like GMOs, when it comes to issues like TTIP, or also skepticism against science in general. The question is, if it's not rational, what is it then? Is it driven by ideology, or is it driven by maybe in Austria, because we have a long-lasting tradition, as you know, in this respect, by schizophrenia, because this was detected in Austria. Or what else is it? But I think this is really one of the most serious questions, and some argue in the meantime what would be needed is a kind of new enlightenment. Others argue that this is a time-limited phenomenon which will disappear again, but we really don't know. And what worries me also is that the power of this spreading irrationality can create a lot of damage to all of us, and this is the risk we are facing. So when we then go closer to the issue which we should discuss, the question of securing enough food for 9 billion, then I think it would be necessary first also to be clear and to specify a little bit what do we mean by that, because one thing is to produce enough food for 9 billion people, but this doesn't automatically mean that if you produce enough food for 9 billion that everybody has to eat enough. So the question of food access and the question of distribution of food remains, and is maybe when we think about ways how we can eradicate hunger, maybe more important than the production question as such. And therefore, if I should give some priorities or possible priorities, what is most important when we would like to, and this is what should be decided later this year in September in the General Assembly of the UN, eradication of hunger. So if we would like to achieve this, then the question is, first of all, I think we will not be able to do it if we don't look at the same time very carefully how we can increase the wealth of all people. Because poorness, as long as poorness accompanies the nutrition question, as long as we will see hunger continuing. The next point, which is popping up more and more and becomes more important, is can we not deal better with food losses and food waste? Yeah? Because if you think that, broadly speaking, 1/3 of the world's food production is wasted, I mean, then you can see that it wouldn't be necessary to produce more, even if we could deal properly with this waste and with these losses. We can solve most of the production problem. You mentioned climate change. I fully agree with that. I think this is really one of the fundamental challenges, and in relation to that, we have to think about the most important foodstuff, and this is water. Yeah, and with water scarcity, we will deal in the future a lot, because it is obvious that climate change will, in many places of this world, change the ability of water. And and my final point is, I think we have to reflect better what should be the right diet for the future. In other words, it can't be a good concept that we simply increase, especially at the moment in the emerging countries, the animal protein nutrition or diet. This is impossible. If we would generalize that for the whole world, then our system would collapse. I think these are the focus areas. All the other questions are also important, but not so fundamental, I would say.
Offsprings, more offsprings.
More offsprings.
Thank you, Franz, both of you. Florian, I think we have a challenging start, because if I summarize what Kees and Franz said, it's really not a matter of production increase only, maybe not at all. It's a matter of to look into the chain. It's a matter to look into the losses. It's a matter of institutional change, governance. It is a matter of rationality and emotion. Isn't it depressing when you hear this? Because we don't do anything of it in IIASA. So my question to you is of little, how are we ready as science to challenge these questions and these challenges?
Well, thank you very much, Pavel, first of all, for putting me into this really challenging situation to sit here with two real Europeans, as we could hear, and have this discussion, a very interesting discussion. And I like very much how this started off in a philosophical way, and then Mr. Fischler brought it more already towards our scientific challenges. And now it is up to me to actually not agree with my Director General, because I think many of these issues we are tackling already.
That's what I wanted to actually hear. So
Okay.
this is
Good. So by that, and also in a very scientific manner, let me first put up what I think from our scientific point of view are here the objectives what we have to meet somehow. And I just said 5 minutes ago and tried to concentrate what these are, and I came up immediately, okay, it's easy. The topic is feed the world, so the biggest challenge, feed the world. we need to do it in a sustainable way. So here already we get into the first trouble probably. At the same time, climate change comes in, even if some people won't believe it still. This is something we have to deal with. At the same time, we have additional objectives that we have to tackle, which is we need to produce more biomass for bioenergy needs. By the end of this century, we should come up with additional 200 to 300 exajoules coming from biomass. How do we produce this feedstock when we have at the same time to protect environment? We should not eat more into pristine forests, for instance. We have here a clear conflict with agriculture and forestry. Now we are in the lucky situation that IIASA is famous for its integrated approach. Before the foresters looked at the trees and the farmers looked at their agricultural crop production, and that was it. Now it's up to us to look at that in a very holistic and integrated way. And the question is here, what can IIASA contribute? What can science contribute? And I would like to concentrate, to keep it short, only on 3 aspects here, and I formulated that in questions actually. The first question is a big challenge for us, but we are working on that. Where is agriculture actually happening? Sounds like a stupid question, of course, everywhere if you look out there. But for us, coming from a modeling sector where the better, the higher the quality that goes into our models, the better are the results. So we need real information, and if we then look into the information out there and realize that the uncertainty where and what kind of cropland is out there is varying by 30 to 40% globally, we have already a big challenge here, and this directly influences also our management options, of course. Do we have this land available for additional production or not, or is there production already happening, and to what extent, and who is the owner? So this is one of the first questions. The second one is what will be the future development of, for instance, crop production under climate change? Will climate change over the next 50 to 100 years affect crop production that much that we have really to worry, or is it not that much? Are there other factors which are jumping in? Can we increase, and I believe so, productivity on existing area by a substantive amount just by improving our management, like fertilization, irrigation on existing area? So this is the second question. And the third question is then coming into the more economic fields here. How do we optimize now our land use? How do we optimize our food production? And you mentioned it, how do we optimize our food access? So with that, I think these are 3 questions, I think, which directly we at IIASA are challenged, and we are working on that. We can come up with answers, we can contribute, and it is a big pleasure to sit with also 2 very well-renowned policy experts, because here is actually the capacity to put the results, the potentials, what we come up under different scenarios into reality.
Thank you, Florian. The subtitle of your question, of my question to you was, since you are sitting here interfacing from science to policy, you mentioned these are 2 leaders in the political arena over the last maybe 20 years even. Do you believe that the dialogue between science and policy in terms of food and agriculture, is it a broken dialogue? Is it a good dialogue? Is it an effective dialogue? How do you view it? Because we are interacting with so many, for example, European Commission bodies.
Exactly.
Are we satisfied from the science point of view with this dialogue?
Based on that comment, we are interacting with so many Commission bodies. This is fact. We are in daily communication with many of the relevant DGs, and they pose very challenging questions on us in very short time frame, because we are always running behind. And I think this is where really we have to show that the tools that we are developing at IIASA can live up what they promise. And we have to also realize that such a successful policy and science interface, so to say, behind the scenes is not really visible. You cannot go out there and say, these are the numbers which the Commission used in the climate negotiations or in order to improve existing agricultural policies in Europe or globally. But this is actually what is happening. So it is maybe not a question of quality, but a little bit of visibility.
Okay.
Cees and Franz, would you like to respond directly to those?
Yeah, I would like to have a short comment, because even if we are sure as scientists, I spent only 5 years in politics, great years together with Franz. But there is no investment in science. But the difficulty I would like to highlight is that if we are sure that our calculations and our insights are all right on the basis of what we know, because science is always, for the time being, and of course insights are deepening, views are broadening every day. But what is the acceptance of the public? If you are sure that you have the right measures on the table from a scientific point of view, that's one point. That's our world. But the world outside, the general public, do they accept the authority of science as it was being done in, let's say, after the war? That's exactly my point.
Coming back to the original point.
Yes, that's exactly my point. So for policy reasons, it's vital to realize that. And you can see that in the way in Western democracies, how the basis, the people, the men in the street are looking on politics as a measure to govern the country or to govern Europe. Look at the, let's say, the skepticism about Brussels and all its regulations. That's the very deep split between science and society, and science and society is part of that. So even if we are perfectly sure, the question is how can we convince the general public in a democracy, that's vital, to take the right measures.
If you take it back, I'm coming to you in a second, Franz, to the question here, which is a hopefully top-level world science in the room together with very experienced top-level former politicians, and etc. Are you suggesting that actually we should be talking triangle rather than two players, which means between the science policy and the public and the civil society? Are you suggesting that?
Yeah.
And eventually even to the research?
I mentioned, for instance, when Louise Fresco came into office at Wageningen University, and she made her first maiden speech on this issue. How can we bring science and scientific solutions, scientific insights to politicians and to the general public in order to make the world somewhat better, not only national or in Europe, but in general? And that's a big question. And that's a vital question. And I think it's one of the great endeavors for science in itself, not only to look inside in or discipline or interdisciplinary work, but to see how can we translate our insights, which are very difficult, of course, but we are not trusted as we were in the past. So, and if we cannot bridge that gap between science and society, then science loses its weight, and we have no other guidance than science to come up to the best solutions. For instance, in climate change, you said it, climate change. Some people don't believe in the United States. Well, science is there, culminating, you can say. And even there, in that society, that democratic society, there's a lot of people that don't believe in climate change.
So I will come now to Franz, but I mean what you are positioning for discussion here, that science should become part of the solution space in a triangle between science policy and civil society. This is what you are suggesting, and it's a very important suggestion because, again, this is going to be discussed within the IIASA international approach to this field for the next 10 years. Franz, over to you.
Well, I disagree a little bit with you that if you say science should be part of a solution. I think science is and has to be part of the solutions. Without science, we are lost in our world. This is what the reality tells us. But let's assume that at least some rational politicians are left, yeah?
which is quite a hypothesis.
Quite a hypothesis. But I think we don't have the time to go in an in-depth discussion for what are the reasons why this skepticism is so spreading and why is it so different in different parts of the world. Yeah? For example, why is the skepticism much higher in Catholic countries than in Protestant countries? Very obvious. Or why is it much less in the US than in Europe? So there are many reasons, but as I said, we don't have the time for that. Coming back to the more practical issue of food and food availability, the question what should happen to feed more people in principle is we have to increase the yields. If you look back, the last doubling of the world's agricultural production came more than 90% from yield increases and less than 10% from more land. Yeah? And I think this will not totally change in the future. The additional land, I mean, there's not so much land additionally available. In some parts, for example, in Russia or Ukraine, or in some parts of Africa, very important, and we shouldn't underestimate this importance. Also maybe in some parts of Asia, but more or less there's not much more than. So we have to focus on yield. But with the yield, the problem is we cannot make the same mistake what we did in the 1960s and the following years, because we increased then the yields very rapidly, but very often at the cost of the environment. And this has to be changed. Therefore, I think this concept which was developed some years ago in the UK about sustainable intensification would make a lot of sense. Yeah? One of the consequences of this, of applying this concept, would be then to say that we have to look at the different situation in the different parts of the world. For example, here in Europe, I think here it is maybe more not so much sustainable intensification, it's more intensified sustainability, because we in Europe we are still struggling with many ecological difficulties, and at least we should not make the same mistakes in other parts of the world, especially not in the developing world. So here I think a lot of additional research will be necessary to achieve this goal. Yeah? We have to think about different crop management methods and what have you. Yeah? We have also to think about how we can raise more efficiently cattle or animals. We have to think about closing, at least to some degree, the natural loops, which we got more and more open, and partly damaging the groundwater tables and so on and so forth. I think this is also an important part. And you mentioned then also the biomass in general. Yeah? So the question is, are there ways that we can use in a sustainable manner those parts of our plants which are not used for food purposes? Is this possible? Because we have at the same time to be aware that fertilization is also an important aspect, and to keep the humus content in our soils and so on. So it is not so easy. And especially, I think we should not give the impression that we can solve all our problems with fossil energy resources by producing more biomass. This is an illusion. I think also biomass is first of all limited, so therefore we have to think in which areas can we use the biomass best. We have such concepts already, for example, for wood and for forest plants, and I think we should develop a similar concept also for agriculture biomass, which is called a cascade use of biomass. This seems to me an important aspect. I think then, especially in the poor countries, most in Africa and in East Asia, there the problem is how should we develop all the very small-scale farmers, all those 1 hectare or less farmers who are mainly only producing for their own family and for their own consumption, who are not producing for the market, and they are, for them, they are most at risk compared with all other producers, for that they starve from hunger. It is a pity, if you look at the statistics, that the biggest number of hungry people are farmers. And I think there a change is absolutely necessary.
Let me pick up on 2 elements of it which I would like to discuss, you address and maybe discuss with the audience. Basically, you both agree that one of the ways, not the only one, is to intensify yield. More crop per drop, we used to call it, or more crop per hectare because of more fertilization.
More crop per hectare.
Yeah. Both fertilizer and water. Okay. Now, if you look at the challenge, roughly, without current practices, without assuming at this point, without using extensively GMO, we eat about 30–40% more food. And for example, some of the basic nutrients like phosphorus is not maybe there. How far do we get with this? How far really can we get with this? Unless we go to the fully recycled system, sometimes we call it urban agriculture. In other words, do we know enough about how far we can get by intensifying, both water-wise and nutrient-wise? That's my first question. Second question is about the small-scale farmers. I was going to ask this question when I would go to common policies of agriculture in Europe, but you were both in a very prominent positions, ministers and commissioners of agriculture trade. Sometimes we discuss this in a scientific circle, but also with Mr. Ban Ki-moon. Equal opportunities. If you look in Africa, successful stories in Botswana or in Egypt, there is still other issue in table, like the trade barriers, like the import barriers to European Union, for example. There are things like the wrongly targeted subsidies.
Yeah.
Would you like to address that? I mean, was it how was it during your times? I mean, was this a table?
Tell about that.
How does it look like in terms of the real responsibility for the global commons? I think it's a challenging question, so both two.
Well,
would
Franz,
you like to start?
Starting with sugar beets. Huh?
Yeah, maybe.
Well, at that time, when I was minister in the cabinet that I was sitting in, I had a discussion with the Minister of Developing for the developing countries. And the storyline was the following. We need to bring down the production of beet sugar in the EU, and thereby we create opportunities for instance, African countries to produce cane sugar. And that's a good thing. That's the best way of helping those developing countries. And my comment on that, and I lost it, of course, because my other colleagues supported the most popular minister, the minister with the biggest budget.
Who was it at that time?
That was at that time. I've forgotten the name.
It was not Pronk at the time. Not Pronk.
No, but what I want to say is this. I said, you can be sure that if we bring back the sugar production in the EU, it will be filled in by the Brazilians. And the environmental consequences will be even worse. And nobody believed me. Nobody believed us, Franz, because we had to do it.
Now it's happening.
we had to do it. And now the consequence, after 10 years of this reform of the sugar market, and it also yields for other markets, the consequences are that the biggest producers, the low-cost producers with the lowest, let's say, care for the environment, have taken over the gaps made by Europe. I don't say that the common agricultural policy was the panacea for all evils. Of course not, because it was created after the war for quite other purposes than it was that it grew to in the years, and it grew out of the original targets. But let's not forget that in helping small-scale farmers, smallholders farmers, the best thing we can do is helping them by buying their products, and by helping them to mechanize their hard work labor. Because in Africa, the women are doing the labor, and the men are sitting drinking beer under the trees. Of course, not everybody. But I visited quite a lot of countries there, and my son is doing business with small holders, trying to bring them small machinery adapted to their circumstances. And what you see there is astonishing. The moment a little tractor is coming out of an airplane or a ship and is brought into that village, the men are doing the jobs. And that's a very important change. Productivity is growing, and the social conditions are changing, so that women can do what they have to do, raising their children, getting less children because the general welfare is increasing, and that is what we should do. Otherwise, smallholders in their poverty will go to the cities, finding no work and creating a lot of problems. So
it's a mechanization.
In my view, in facing the problems of world food production, the humanities and the social sciences can contribute even more to solving the problem than the traditional, let's say, technical agronomy or other technical parts of science. Well, there's another firecracker I would like to bring in.
Do we have enough social science in our food and agriculture related?
And humanities.
Yeah.
Because we have to change the mindset of people.
Do we have
I fully agree, but I think we should also deal a little bit with the question of trade barriers or trade as such. Yeah? And here I think it is necessary to differentiate a little bit and also to be clear about the strategy. At the moment, it is a real pity that we don't make any progress at the international level, because I'm still convinced that a multilateral approach would be much better than a bilateral approach. But everybody nowadays is going for bilateral approaches because of lack of progress in the Doha round and so on and so forth. So, second, I think there are heavily trade distorting and competition distorting measures in place still in some parts of the world of different nature and so on and so forth. but it is also a matter of fact that the biggest trade barriers exist between the developing countries. They block each other as much as they can. This is a real problem. But there are, on the other hand, also other things like, I mean, it is no longer necessary to discuss whether one should get rid of export subsidization or not. This was always my position, but we should get rid of all forms of export subsidization, not only specifically the European ones. By the way, since, well, I think for 5 years now already, the volume of export subsidies of the European Union is 0. So this is over. I hope this will not come back. But you have then also other phenomena. For example, I still don't understand why the import of raw coffee is without any duties. But if you import roasted coffee, there's a high duty on that. So I think Nestle needs a lot of protection. Seems. This is what is called tariff escalation. This is not only one example. There are many other things. So we have, we should relaunch maybe a new round or whatever round. Because the Doha round, as many say, rightly, I would say, the Doha round is dead. So, but what else? We cannot. We will end up in a disaster if we think that we can solve the international trade problems only with bilateral agreements. There's another trade issue. And this is a problem mainly for the net importing developing countries, for example, north of Africa, because in the meantime we know that many riots and also the so-called Arab Spring in Egypt, for example, the immediate drastic increase of bread prices was one of the reasons why it happened. And here, this problem can only be managed within agreements, not trade agreements so much. I think here it would be necessary to have agreements, for example, for food aid and similar things.
Stabilizing food
prices and things like that.
Both of you, this is again a good challenge for discussion with the science. Can I ask some of my scientists here, do we have a good set of solution scenarios for the ideal trade agreement to address these issues? Do we do any of the research to that? I mean, because we do economic modeling, but I mean, would it be interesting to look at it as a possibility to sort of frame the Florian, maybe some of you.
I mean, let me start that maybe, because this is already going into the right direction. We have a case starting with this perception problem, public acceptance, etc. There's this saying, fact is fact, but perception is reality. So this brings it actually to the point that we are dealing with a problem that only science together with policymakers and politics can solve. We have to work much more hand in hand. This is also what I mentioned a little bit, that if you hide that your negotiation is based on science, this is not really favoring science. So why should the public trust science, and why should the public, on the other hand, trust politics? And I think we are all facing these problems with multilateral agreements are failing. There is Doha in the agricultural area. There is the climate negotiations where we in general and trade area. I mean, there is the climate issues which are dealt with at the COPs. And we are all hoping for Paris, but what is happening actually are sub-themes, like for instance REDD in the forest area, and on the other hand, for instance, some bilateral agreements probably going on trade. But I think we can with science, and this is also our role, support decision makers, be it at European Union level, but also in the countries you mentioned in Africa, that they put up trade barriers as high as possible vis-à-vis each other, neighboring countries, and this consequently has also again to do with what you mentioned in we have to produce more, we have to also invest probably in a better storage system which can buffer out some of the climate effects but also other conflict areas. So planning in this case, and this is where we have to come up, optimization and planning support, this has to be the role of science first.
I have certain doubts here as long as we speak about trade, because I mean, Pavel, you asked what is the ideal trade solution. The ideal solution, the answer is very simple, is free trade. But free trade is not achievable.
And what is free trade?
And what is free trade? So therefore, I think the role of science in the trade field is more to do impact analysis. Is more to analyze the consequences of not having a trade agreement, or the consequences or the costs for all of us of the delay of a new trade agreement and things like that. I think their science would be very helpful.
So I would like to put two specific questions and to turn to audience for questions. There are two very isolated but important issues. First, you mentioned a couple of times GMOs, and we left that issue. We know how difficult and contested the issue has been in European context. We know that even led to a discussion which maybe led to abandonment of the chief scientist of the European Commission President position. This is what we also know. What do you think, if you look ahead 10 years from now? Two questions. First, is this challenge we discussed today globally possible to be solved without GMO? And second question is, what is your prediction scenario for the European debate on GMOs 10 years from now?
Well, should I start, Franz? You take the 10 years.
Should I start?
Now, what always strikes me in the discussions about GMOs is the big difference between the discussion on GMOs in food and the use of GMOs like technology in medicine. If it goes to the health of the people, we have the most sophisticated ways of, let's say, doing bad, ugly things with life itself, in the view of the people. But if you want to have a child and you can't get one, there are technology-driven solutions. And nobody is questioning that. There are some figures posing questions, but not in general. But about food, everybody is doubting whether or not that's a good technique, and you will stay healthy if you take that Frankenstein food-like type. That strikes me always. So this is not a question of whether we trust technology, but it's a question of how this technology affects us. If it can solve our problems, our medical condition, and with food we say, well, it goes through us. So it's a very, it's quite another thing. That's one point. The discussion in Europe will take some 10 years, and I think we cannot do without GMOs in facing these enormous problems, because you have water, climate, food distribution, energy, and they are all intertwined. You will need it, otherwise you can't cope with these 9 billion people in 2050.
Franz, do you agree to that?
Well, in principle, yes, but I think there are also some caveats. Yeah? First of all, I'm sure that we will need biotechnology, also the so-called green biotechnology. This is GMs in food. In the future, for example, to deal better with stresses because of lack of water, because of droughts and similar things. We will see with climate change totally different pests in areas where we haven't seen them so far. We will also see new insects and other things affecting our crops. And the question here is primarily, in principle, the speed. And the biggest advantage of biotechnology is to increase enormously the speed for developing new varieties or even new species. Yeah? In addition to that, I think very soon we will go a step further, because I was recently, months ago, I was in Cambridge, in the UK, Cambridge, and I spoke with those people who developed the decoding of genomes, yeah? And they are now on the way not only to decode the genomes, but also to synthesize new genomes, artificially genomes. So the traditional technique to implement a certain gene from an insect or from another animal into the genome of an animal, this is not the future. So we will see totally new techniques, and this is then maybe for the skeptics even more worrying than what we have seen so far. But I don't see in the long run a different way. So the thinking, or in reality it's more a feeling than a thinking, that we can solve all our problems only if everybody moves on to organic food production. This is not, in reality, it is not the solution.
Before I go to Florian, I wanted to ask you anyway, let's stay for a minute with the organic agriculture. The numbers which I have, maybe not be the latest one, but it seems to be stagnating. In Austria, I read in last week at the Standard, I think 12% and stagnating for years already.
We are higher.
Higher, 60 maybe. In Netherlands, I think even much less.
Yeah, 5%.
5%. So if Netherlands 5%, Austria 16, I don't know, maybe plus. Is that a maximum? Do you see any growth of the organic agriculture market, or is it about what it is? Would it remain elite? Would it go to more public?
The answer to that, in my view, is very simple. In the end, this is really a market issue. Yeah? The question is, how different is the price for organic food between the standard food? Yeah? And the acceptance, from what we know from market observations, the acceptance is a maximum of 10 to 15% price difference, not more. Yeah? So as long as we can keep that, there will be a clear demand for that, under the condition that also the quality is right. Yeah? So the consumers expect that the quality of the products, also how they look like and so on, is the same as for standard products. Whether the content of proteins, vitamins, or other things is bigger or not is of less importance. And at the same time, one or the main reason I would say for the stagnation in Austria of organic food at the moment is that we have a new fashion. And the new fashion is regional food. Yeah? So and the ordinary consumer doesn't differentiate a lot whether it's organic or regional. Regional is, in the understanding of the consumer, also very close to nature.
Well, in my view, it's a question of consumer preferences, as Franz said, and it is a niche market, and it is mainly driven by well-to-do consumers, because there is a price difference. So as long as there is a demand from powerful consumers, there will be production of organic food. But to your question, can we feed the world by producing organic food as we do it now, or even if we do it better? The answer is certainly no. But that doesn't mean that it is not important to develop methods of organic food production and to increase the productivity of these kinds of production methods, because there's a lot to be won coming from, let's say, the ancient production method to now more sophisticated production method. For instance, in the dairy sector, it's much more simple to produce organic food than in the crop sector, because of the weed problem, which has always been the torment of every farmer. And there's a last famous word, Pavel. I started my lectures on agriculture always with one sentence, as I said, well, agriculture is doing business with the sun. With the sun. And that's the essence of agriculture. And never forget never forget the entropy law, because on these two bases, the sun and the fact that the entropy law is there, that's the basis for every start of thinking on how we should deal with agricultural production in the future. And I fully agree, the most simple way of dealing with these kinds of problems is to spare, to economize on waste, and to prevent that we throw away 100 tons of food in a city like Hamburg per day.
I have not mentioned, and it's not written by all the credentials of our speakers, that Cees Veerman not only is former minister and all of these things position, he's actually a farmer. And he has been having a farm for old, I think, even inherited from his father.
Yes.
Farm in Netherlands, he had a farm in France. So there's a kind of food chain of the experience from farming to the science and policy, vice versa. I know we are getting a little bit late, but I still would like to open for a couple of minutes for those who really would like to ask a question to the distinguished panelists. Peter.
Okay, so my name is Peter Havlík. I am leading here at IIASA a group of about 20 mostly economists dealing with agricultural and forest sector modeling for medium and long term at the global scale. Thank you very much for the inspiring discussion. I think the individual topics we could discuss at length, but I would return back to the origin, where you mentioned on the one hand the skepticism from the policy side to the science, and on the other hand the rationality, because the two are maybe related. Actually, what we experience in our team is, I would not call it skepticism, but over expectations. And I think that at least in social sciences or in this type of large-scale modeling and so on, we never had these high expectations from the policymakers that we have now. I have had from one of the fathers of agricultural sector modelings, Bruce McCarroll, who said that 90% of the time the models should be used to kind of try to understand, to put relationships, to understand the systems and so on, and only 1 or 2% to produce the numbers. While nowadays we are on a daily basis expected to produce the numbers with the 1 decimal exactitude and so on. And I think there is actually a problem with this over expectation, and so one of the cases is obviously presented here by my colleague Hugo Valin, who is since 1 year staring on the computer trying to check what the ILUC effect of the biofuels is, because these are numbers which in theory the Commission wants to cut in the stone. And I think that this is related a little bit to the policy making and to the rationality and so on. I think that there is maybe something missing in the policy making nowadays, if the only kind of inputs to the decision making are the facts which the science does not have. And I actually doubt about the rationality, because your rationality is different than my rationality and so on. So what would it be? What kind of value frameworks are needed to make the best use from the always limited knowledge which will come from the science.
In other words, how rational is the policy making? How rational are the ministers?
From my side, 3 short answers to that. First, I would really invite you as a modeler to make sure that your consumers and also the policy sector understand better what a model is. Because very often, for good or bad purposes, your results are used in a way so to give the impression that this is the reality and not the model. Yeah? So the difference between the reality and the model is very often lost. Yeah? I think here something should be done. The second thing is, my second answer is, I think Cees is right, and you are maybe you should reflect a little bit upon that. It is really deeper. Yeah? The problem is really deeper, and the problem is also, for example, yeah, why does people not, when they enter an aeroplane, first ask the pilot whether he did in due time his health service? Why don't they ask when this last service of the plane was, and so on and so forth? They simply enter it, and nobody has any doubt that this thing will work, yeah, when it starts. When we speak about food, everybody seems to know better how one should produce in the right way this food. Yeah. Why is this difference? This is what I don't understand. Yeah. And the third thing is, I think at least part of the solution could be to think about different and better ways how we communicate scientific findings and how we engage in a discussion where not only the politicians are involved, but also our citizens are more involved. And here we have to think also, is there not a way to use better the mass media, to use, for example, better the new media? If we are not able to change this lack of communication, then I think the situation will continue to worsen.
Well, if I may comment on that, I fully agree. Models are not reality, just a shade of reality. But we present them many times as reality itself. And we are proud of it. And we base our conclusions on it. And we fail to see in the end, because we're all very much engaged in our results and we believe in it and we have invested time and reputation in it, and we many times had some, say, if a point in the scatter diagram doesn't fit in, we say, well, there's an exception. That's an exception. And we come too close to scientific fraud many times. In the Netherlands, there's a high debate on scientific fraud because we're so focused on producing results that we can rely on and we believe in. So the first thing I think is to be honest to the public, to be honest. As far as we know, as far as our insights are developed, we think this is the case. And that's not a failure of science, but that's exactly what science is. Science is as far as we know, and no step further. And let's not be seduced by the public and say, well, what will happen then? And we say, we don't know. This is what we know. And what will happen afterwards, we don't know. Economics, finance. Now, what will be the consequences of a Brexit? We don't know. But there are many economists in newspapers and for televisions bringing the world, the words to the world and their opinions. They should be honest, and they should be, let's say, should be not so certain about what they know, because we don't. And speaking of models, the financial crisis started by blindly accepting the outcomes of financial models. And the man, or the two men who won the Nobel Prize, went broke on basis of their own models.
I think this concept of honesty in communicating uncertainties in the science policy dialogue is a very key concept. We are trying to involve it, of course, in our strategies. And it was also part of our own success case, because the way how we got accepted this huge plan, Delta plan, was that we were able to communicate honestly to the parliament, to all the policymakers, the uncertainties, and come with a solution which were not certain either. Space of solution rather than one big number. That's. I would like to ask you to ask questions.
Let me just quickly follow up on that, because I think there is a big need of capacity building. And this capacity building is not only the one which the science has to do vis-à-vis the public,
Absolutely.
but it is also this honesty to not abuse model results from the policy-making point of view. Because only if here trust exists in this triangle which you mentioned before, between science, the public, and the policymakers, this is the way we have to go and where we have to strengthen. And I think the closer ties have to be between the policymakers and the science, because from here this capacity building effort has to come, and this is kind of an obligatory service vis-à-vis the public which we have to establish here. And one way to do that is this keyword, for instance, crowdsourcing, or the integration of the public into science itself.
And in the discussion in science itself.
Into the discussion, first of all, this is the
stakeholder interview,
but
science.
here
Sure.
it is really the science making with
Absolutely
the help
right.
of the public. And this is something where especially IIASA is also since years at the forefront. Because some of my questions at the beginning, where is happening what, and can we be sure that a marginal land is really marginal, and what is there, where is it exactly, who owns it, and is this a high quality marginal land, or is this on somewhere 3,000 meters elevation, or in the desert, or in the critical area. So here citizen science is the only way, in an affordable way, so to say, without launching new satellite systems, to do that. And if we can combine this with Earth observation, for instance, using Sentinel, new European satellites going up there, I think then we are a big step further. And this is also one of the frontiers where IIASA, with its science, tries to contribute to this, solving this question.
I fully agree with that.
Of course, the consequences are
In addition to that, you have also the problem of hermeneutic per se. This is an even more difficult than interpretation question.
Consequences are that whole scientific enterprise moving to this engaged scholarship type of science, of course, needs also rethinking. We discussed that also in that context. Günther, this is your last question this afternoon. You have been doing food modeling since the 80s, so what is your view on this?
I think IIASA has been working on food questions for 35, 40 years now. And there's a lot of things to be said to many of the topics that came up. I just want to mention one, because you started with rationality, and later on we were talking about markets and market distortions. And IIASA wrote a book about 25 years ago which looked at the impacts of trade liberalization. And I think there were some very simple messages, very rational in the end, economists would probably say, messages which said global welfare increases, there are losers and winners. The consequence, the recommendation was, if we can compensate the losers, then everybody can be better off. And of course that is not happening in reality, or there would be big doubts how this can be done. And thirdly is, why is it only goods that should move freely? Why not labor or other things? The modeling results at that time also were the biggest benefit would come from free movement of labor. And of course, not everybody, not every country would like that consequence. So rationality, I think, is easy, but social acceptance of some of these things is a different issue. That's one thing. Second, on the resources, you said and you think GMOs are inevitable for the future. I would agree to the extent that, of course, we need more drought-tolerant species. We probably need more pest-tolerant species. All this is well taken, but there are negative aspects of GMOs which have been debated a lot, and we cannot just forget about those. I think it's not the irrational things about the GMOs, but I think the very real issues of using GMOs, destroying your neighbor's fields, all those questions which have come up. Secondly, I think IIASA has been doing very careful modeling studies on how big is the, what we call the yield gap, so the actual production and the current agricultural land divided by the potential, production potential, meaning best management of the land. And we see it's about 0.6, so the gap is 40%. It means with current production areas, we should be able, or the world should be able to produce 1.4, 1.5 times more than is currently done. It's obvious that the big gap...
Without expanding the land, right?
Without expanding the land. The other debate would be how much more land is there, and I agree, there's little in Asia, there is little, some in Europe, maybe some in North America, there's a lot, or quite a bit in Africa, and there's also still some in South America, according to the modeling results. But the question is, how can we trigger the innovation, the improvement in African countries, for example, some of the developing countries that are so far behind best practices in agricultural production. It's not a matter of GMOs, I think it's a matter of more inputs, more market access, more connectivity of the system, maybe less corruption. There's many things that one can mention. So I think GMOs, perhaps yes, but it's not the answer to the current and also not the near future food security problems.
Well, I agree with that, but there is one thing that has not been highlighted here this afternoon, and that is the question of good governance. I mentioned democracy, and democracy is, in my view, one of the best governance systems we have. The least worst, as Churchill said. But good governance, if you have a bad governance, corruption, there is no endeavor in investing in such a world. What is the problem in Ukraine and in Russia? Nobody will invest in these countries, although there is a lot to be won from an agricultural point of view, because there is no stable government. In Africa, it's the same. If you have corruption, bad governance is the principal point, and that's the reason why I said in your modeling, you need more influence and more insight of the humanities and of the social sciences in order to have sound and reasonable insights in what should be done in the facing the world food problems.
It's your last word, and then
I think it is really good. The answer is very good in my view, and I fully agree. But also your example is very good, and I would like to come back a little bit to your trade example. Yeah. So the model says that if we would have freer trade, the global welfare would increase. Fine. But then you go to Doha or to another WTO event, and then you try to find there anybody who is representing global welfare. There's nobody there. You will only find people representing national welfare or specific sectoral interests and so on and so forth. Yeah. So therefore, although the model is correct and tells the truth, in the practical political situation, it doesn't help much. This is a little bit the tension between the policy makers and the scientists in this field, and just that we don't have a misunderstanding between us. So when I said GMOs in the longer term, especially in relation to climate change and so on, will be necessary. Or at least research to find. I didn't say GMOs. I said biotechnology or bioengineering. And I stick to this position. But this doesn't automatically mean that each GM concept is a good one. And this doesn't mean that what we see, the behavior of Monsanto and other companies is an acceptable one. So we have to develop also a GM policy in the end. We need rules how we can make proper use of the scientific findings.
And one fact of life is that the funds for agricultural research in the Western world have gone down since the 60s. In absolute amounts and of course in relative amounts. And that's one of the huge problems we are facing. We don't...
Also for education.
Yes.
Same thing, yeah.
Yes.
Florian, I would like to ask you to say a few words to conclude from your position.
Yeah. From my position, I would like to pick up what I said at the beginning. We are standing in front of huge challenges, not only me up here, but society as such. We are facing climate change and all the sectors have to contribute. And within the sectors, I think we cannot say one thing like GM is a complete no and we can do it all. I think we have to optimize the interplay of all the options we have. And this is also one of the tasks we as an systems analysis institute that puts on our flag that we are the ones to do integrated science, that we come up with optimal systems which would be a pathway into the future, looking especially in all of the options in the agricultural area. It is mostly management and of course other types where we can improve in order to contribute to these huge challenges, because the sectors like industry, etc., we have plans by 2030 and 2050 in the EU. We all know that basically they decarbonize completely. The private sector completely decarbonized, the transport sector 50%, and if you want to do more, it's again agriculture, we can do it. But it plays down that agriculture will be the crucial factor in this game, and I think here we have all to work
doing
together.
business with the sun.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a program in
And don't forget the red lights.
2024 and one night where this debate can go for 24 hours, whole night. Until
wouldn't be a bad thing.
It was a debate which led to many of the positional statements which probably are transitional statements for the future generation of research and policy making. I would like to thank you. Thank you, Florian, for his bravery to stand up here, because I asked him actually yesterday.
You did a great job.
He was very worried about it. I think he did represent all of you in excellent way. And I think all of three deserve a big hand from all of us. Thank you very much.
Yes, it was the front.
It's been a pleasure. We need to continue.
Okay.